please welcome Ben Bartlett.
Thank you, good morning. Privileged to be here, and thanks to the Mass Youth Soccer Association for the invitation. There is intended to be quite a lot of detail through the slides, some of which, depending upon where you're sitting, you might or might not be able to see. The intention is that at the end, if you would like my email address, if you want to be able to examine some of the greater detail to a greater extent, then please email. I'm happy to share any of the information. But the intention is to go broad picture and narrow down to some of the detail. But the big question that sits in the middle is about what's important in your context. Some of the stuff that we'll share from my experiences across a number of clubs and associations relate to the things that were important in those environments. Some of those things might directly connect with the things that are important in your environment, but they might not. So if you keep anything in your mind through the next sort of 45 minutes to an hour, place in your mind what's important in your context. And as a consequence, think about how your team, your club, your environment intends to play football, how you support the development of the players regardless of whether they're 8 or 38. And then as a consequence, how do you deliver coaching? And by coaching, I don't just mean the football sessions when you put cones down, you put pennies on players and the ball starts to roll, but the general interactions that you have with every single person in your environment, where every moment we've got an opportunity to influence and shape the way that people think, which is perhaps a broader, more extensive way to consider coaching. I was fortunate to work at Fulham for 4 years. We had, I guess, Pakistani-American ownership. Shahid Khan, who also owns the Jaguars, which was a nice insight before coming to the States about some of the things that are perhaps important in an American environment. And we had a perhaps somewhat corporate but pretty punchy kind of like vision, which was win football matches and drive profitability. Now, how Marco Silva or Scott Parker win football matches and drive profitability was somewhat different from the work that we did in the academy. You can still win football matches and you can still generate value in players such that they can be sold to realise profit for the football club. But the ways that you go about winning football matches and the ways that you go about driving profitability will be different from senior to youth, will be different from year to year, and will be different with each player, each coach, and each person that you interact with. So the intention is often the question gets asked, win versus development. And there's often almost seemed to be kind of like a dichotomy that if you do development, you trade off the opportunity to win. And if you do winning, you trade off the opportunity to develop. And I'd like to kind of propose to those that don't already believe that you can do both. You can do both. However, it's very, very difficult to develop players in a team that gets pumped 10-0 every week. But it's also very difficult to develop players in a team that wins 10-0 every single week. So it's finding that healthy balance and a recognition that wins, particularly in youth development, are 3 points on a Saturday or a Sunday. But there are also players that come back next year. There are also players that have a sustained career, players that retain their health and their fitness through their adulthood, beyond adulthood. And maybe for many of us, people that go back at our age, however old we are, that reinvest back into the soccer club that they were benefited from when they were playing themselves. So those things will intend to run through this. But I want to take a risk at the beginning and share with you a couple of slides that maybe you haven't seen before. And if you haven't seen them before, I apologise, but here's a couple of slides that you might not have seen before. Thank you for those polite people that joined in with me there, so thank you. I'll use a Houston Dynamo example just to seek to bring some of this to life. But the aspiration is that these are just big buckets or big headers that guide the way that we think about playing. And at the top, vision, values, call it whatever you like, who we are. The club speaks about being a sustainable winner. So win football matches, drive profitability. And some of the ways in which we intend to win is to qualify for the playoffs, to qualify for the latter stages of knockout competitions, season upon season, but also seek to do it in a way such that we're developing and adding value to relatively young players across the club. The three drivers of that are about being fitter, about meaner, and being dominant. And part of that is being fitter than we were yesterday, as well as trying to be fitter than the opponent that we face on any day. Being meaner in terms of giving away very little, but also being mean in terms of in a game where you get very few chances, making sure you don't lose the game. If you get one chance, if you get two chances, make sure that they hit the back of the net. And about being dominant, and we'll speak into some of the data about things that dominant may appear in our play. The kind of three big areas which hopefully were in the opening slide, how we play, the Dynamo player, and how we coach. And the intention is those three things are seen as one part of the same thing. And it's intentional that the Dynamo player is in the middle. The way that we aspire and intend and continue to profile our players is to look at the player as they are, rather than with an arbitrary number, that player is a 6. And as a consequence, even though we have some broad principles that guide the way that we think about how we play football, in many ways that changes either from age group to age group, from team to team, or more importantly, from squad to squad, such that when 1 or 2 players are not available for a particular reason, whilst we may uphold similar principles of the way that we play, some of the detail will change as a consequence of the qualities of the human beings that come into that environment, such that we don't say Hector Herrera is one of our holding midfielders. The person that replaces Hector Herrera has to look exactly like them, because that's going to be really hard for someone to replicate a player that's played in some of the top clubs in Europe and across world football, for an 18 or 19-year-old to come in, as is happening in our pre-season at the moment, and directly replace Hector Herrera. So recognition that it shifts, but that in every sense we seek to profile our players to enable the way that we play to be a reflection of what we've come to understand. And this is a video from the back end of 2022, so leading into our first season, and seeking to understand when you have, I guess, what in American parlance is called a designated player, a player that's pretty critical to the success of the team, how do you make sure that you don't build the team only around him, but that you make him central to many of the things that you're seeking to do. There was view that perhaps he should play a little bit higher, but the challenge with playing a little bit higher is it's difficult for people to serve him, because you almost need Hector serving Hector. You need Hector in a low position to serve Hector in a high position. So we spoke about him starting low to get us started, and then moving higher to contribute to chances, which hopefully means he's not just a 6 or he's not just an 8. At varying moments in his time, he's kind of fulfilling both roles, which hopefully means that he can get us started by having some deep strength, some stability in front of the back 3 or 4, depending upon the system that you play, but also has some opportunity to contribute to stuff going forward. But also recognition that he can't be everywhere all of the time. If he's not needed to go low because somebody else is already low, he should stay high. It isn't about building the whole thing around Hector, but also recognition that in the 2022 season we finished 13th out of 14 in the Western Conference. And the margins, we looked at some set-piece stuff, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a while. And in the 2022 season, our set-piece differential was -11. So we conceded 11 more goals from set-pieces than we scored. So score 10, concede 21, goal differential of -11. You looked at the teams that finished 5th, 6th and 7th, so the teams that snuck into the playoffs, as it was in that season, and it was 0, +1, -1. So we were, at best, 10 goals worse off than those clubs. And if you looked at the difference, we could have finished 7th or 8th as a consequence of change in there. Hector's a pretty good ball striker, so in typical fashion, he took all the corners, all the throw-ins, all the penalties, all the goal kicks, every single set piece. But trying to use the skill that you've got, which is he's great on a delivery, let's make sure that he's delivering particular things. So building the structure of the way that the team plays around what we come to understand, to understand about the players, and a recognition that if we build a game model that says everybody plays a 3-4-3 or a 4-2-3-1 or any other formation, there's a real risk with that, which is we profile people against Hector's current capabilities, but the team is largely built around Hector's current capabilities, which means in 5 years' time, when the players have changed, there's a decent chance that the system has changed, and the risk is that you develop players for a future that they won't exist in. So it's trying to ensure that we enable them to develop an armoury of skills, not so they become vanilla at everything, but they become broad enough in terms of their skill set such that they can adopt a range of different systems and hopefully play in a range of different positions. And I guess what we might start to call players as hybrids. And from my time working for the English Federation, you could look at someone like Jude Bellingham and say, is he a 4 or a 6? Is he an 8? Is he a 10? Bukayo Saka, is he a 7? Is he a 10? Is he an 11? Etc, etc, etc. And you've got some players that are now playing at the top of world football that can fit into a whole range of systems and a whole range of roles. But if you say, what are they good at, you could identify what it is that they're really good at. So they've got an identity, but that identity, isn't notionally attached to this is the position that you play in. And then as a consequence, that's what we measure. And measure is intended to be in inverted commas because it isn't just about data points, even though I will touch on data points. It's more broadly to recognise what is it that we're trying to achieve and how do we ensure that everything that we analyse, look at and broadly reflect upon aligns with the things that we think is important so that we measure what we value rather than value what we can arbitrarily measure. Now in MLS, in the Premier League, you probably get too much data, and then it's very difficult to distill the data that's important down into information that you can give to a head coach to say that might be really important. In other environments, you might be organising your data by notation and analysis while you're making a note with a tally chart to get what you want, which is absolutely fine. There isn't right or wrong with that. But a recognition that what we measure sometimes is by our eyes, is sometimes by our feeling, is sometimes by the conversations that we have with people, which are probably an important guide of what we do next, is the fact that it's 50% of those, or 10.4 of those, or 3 of those. This is, I guess, kind of evolution of some of the thinking that will go through the presentation. This is the under-18s at Fulham from, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago, planning a game against Brighton. And some of the backdrop, the context to what you'll see, and hopefully what I'll seek to talk about, is at that time Fulham were a team that were yo-yoing between being a Premier League club and being a Championship club, which when you're seeking to develop players is pretty difficult, because the players that win the Championship usually aren't the same players that are playing when you get promoted to the Premier League. But the risk is when you then get re-relegated back from the Premier League, and a lot of the big players that you brought in on big money to play in the first team disappear out of the door, you then go back to the same players that got you promoted, who you didn't use when they got you back into the Premier League, to say, oh, can you come again? The other problem that you've got is, are you developing players for the Championship, or are you developing players for the Premier League? And often we would see, like a Fabio Carvalho, make his debut in the Premier League, but get his run in the Championship, 40 games in the year that we got promoted. But also, if you look at the data of the way that the team plays, the data around the way that Fulham played when they're in the Championship is wildly different from the data of the way that you play when you're in the Premier League. Because with respect to these clubs, when you're playing in the Championship, you might be playing Coventry, Rotherham and Sheffield Wednesday. And when you're playing in the Premier League, you're playing against Arsenal, Manchester City and Liverpool. So it's quite difficult. So how do you develop a player such that when they get to the first team, I don't know what league they'll be playing in, I don't know what system they'll be playing in, I don't know which head coach they'll be playing with, and I don't know which players they'll be playing with, because at that time, our club was pretty transient. So the idea was try and prepare them for as many different things as possible. And from this video, you'll see our under-18s playing against Brighton. And in this game, you will see Brighton press with 1, you'll see Brighton press with 2, you'll see Brighton press with 3, and you'll see Brighton press with 4. Now, if you have a relatively rigid game model that says we build out with 3 all of the time, if they only press with 1, there's a real risk there, because you have too many players low. You have a 3 versus 1, which means somewhere further up the pitch, you're outnumbered somewhat significantly, which means you might keep it nicely across your back 3, but when you try to advance to the midfield or the final line, you can't keep it because you're outnumbered in those areas. So we sought to work from a principle, if they press with 1, these are some of the things that we would do, and we would look to switch the ball across the pitch, to run the legs off of their centre forward, and then step into the line to try to provoke more people to come onto you. When they press with 2, we would either use the goalkeeper to support the build-up, or drop a full-back or a midfield player into the defensive line and generate greater width through the outside centre-backs, such that it's 1, 2, 3 versus 2, and largely progress in those wide areas, in which point it was important for those outside centre-backs to be able to play diagonal passes that accessed the opposite side of the pitch. When they pressed with 3, it was important that we used our 10s, and some of this will be animated through the video, and the wing-backs at times to drop into lower positions to draw them on to create more space higher. And the final clip that you should see in a moment is when they press with 4. It's not just about the tactical solutions and the way that you set the team up. It's also about the individual will and skill of the players to receive the ball when they're pressing with a whole load of numbers, manage the ball and roll out of pressure, which you'll see in a moment. That takes bravery from the coach, and it certainly takes bravery from the players for the goalkeeper to play into an area where there's a density of opponents, receive effectively around the top of the box, roll out of pressure and progress. And know that by playing into those areas or being brave enough to play through and out of those areas to get higher, there's a real good opportunity to really expose their backline as a consequence. So recognition that in one single game, the opposition pressed in 4 somewhat different ways, and the skill of the coaches in that environment to be able to enable the players to understand that when they press with 1, this is how we build, 2, 3, 4, we build up in a range of different ways. And my job typically is to watch coaches' behaviour, to see how coaches do stuff. Not to arbitrarily just get the coach to do stuff, but to see how the coach is responding to the players that are in their care. And the really useful thing on that particular day is I didn't hear at any point the coaches joystick the players as to what to do, because they'd supported them across a longer period of time to understand and develop the solutions that enable them to solve the problem in the moment. So the context behind that answer relates to the fact that were we developing players for the first team, were we developing players for the Premier League or the Championship, or more likely to go and play somewhere else? Jay Stansfield at the moment, who developed through this system, is on loan at Birmingham. Kieran Bowie, who developed through this system, is on loan at Northampton Town. So often these players are going to go somewhere else to develop those skills. And if an 18-year-old goes into a senior environment and says, I can only play as an outside winger and this is all I do, boss, there's a decent chance they're not going to be in the team that often. So it's the capacity for those players, A, to understand the answers and be able to solve it without the coach driving them on exactly what to do, and 2, for us to have used the development programme to support that understanding. Which is how this kind of manifests itself as a game model. You'll see 4 different solutions for each part of the game. So along the bottom you'll see build, pressure and convert. Pressure is effectively defending, which sits in the middle. Convert is the final third part, scoring goals. Build is obviously the getting started and moving up the pitch. At the bottom of the slide you'll see the build-up solutions that you just saw in the Fulham versus Brighton video. How do we build up when they press with 2? How do we build up when they press with 3? How do we build up when they press with 4? If you go through the middle of the pitch, you'll see principally the same thing applied to out of possession. How do we press when they build with 2? How do we press when they build with 3? How do we press when they build with 4? How do we defend in our own half, defend our box and defend our goal? Which is going to be pretty important for clubs like Fulham, for clubs like Houston Dynamo, who are unlikely to ever be the Champions League winners year on year, but probably need to find a marginal edge, something that's different about them that helps them compete to be competitive season to season. And the final part is the final third piece, which you'll see a little bit into the Dynamo video, which will come shortly. At times people will say, well, when the players get in the final third, we just want them to be creative. 100% we definitely do. But at times it's almost as if we become less thoughtful and less tactical in our thinking the further up the pitch that we get. When actually teams that score goals more often win games. Advanced players that score lots of goals quite often get in the team and quite often make you money. So a question to all of us, how much time do we spend being really focused in that part of the pitch? And there's 4 tentative solutions up there about a wide triangle. So building up with 3 in the wide area to seek to provoke the opposition to +1 us. A far side threat, which means we've built up on the left, they've +1 us, so we apply a longer pass to access the opposite side of the pitch. The other 2 solutions that are in there, which is a central combination, about having a density of body central enables us to get close combinations to be able to play through. And the 4th and final one is a drive from deep, which means at times we might get into the final third of the pitch by a longer pass, by someone running from deeper positions where there's space in behind. So 4 tentative solutions for each part of the game. And for coaches, this is intended to be a go-to document, not a work from. I wouldn't look at a coach and say, you've not done any wide triangle today, why is that? They're just things that they go to in the event that they need certain solutions. But the intention is the solutions that they build are upheld by our broad principles, but are narrowed down to the specific needs of them, their players, and the environment in which they're playing. However, there's a risk that we see the game model as being only some of those bigger tactical concepts. So the bit that runs through this, the bit that's nested inside of this, is some of the individual skills or tactics that we want to support players to develop. Because the risk is we can organise our players to look like Manchester City. Here's our 3-box-3, stand in the pocket. But when the ball goes in the pocket, the players haven't got the capacity to actually handle the ball and manage the ball and roll out of pressure and progress. So there's 2 layers working together, the broader team tactical concepts and the individual skills that we seek to develop the players to develop, with the understanding that at any moment in time they're going to need both. If I've got 11 players that are magicians on the ball but can't cohere in any way, it's probably only going to get us so far. If I've got 11 players that understand all of the tactics of the game and can relay it to us, but can't actually manage and handle the ball or deal 1v1 in defensive situations, again, our team tactics are probably going to be built on a better sand, which falters and falls away a little bit when the players are seeking to manage themselves in tight situations. And I guess this is the way that our coaches historically and currently are encouraged to think about the curriculum, which isn't that you spend, there's 4 big pictures there, convert, pressure, build, restarts. We don't spend 25% of our week, our 6 weeks, our season, our development career working equally on each of those. The intention is these are the big pictures that are important to us, embed as many of those into every single coaching session interaction that you have with the players, such that it isn't today we're working on build-up, it's today we're working on the way that we play and the needs of the players. And for some, there may be a bigger focus on build-up for more of the time than others. For some, it may be that there's a greater focus on convert, which hopefully means we become less driven by the kind of traditions of a school syllabus and more guided by the individuals that are in our care. And similar to the big team stuff, this is a go-to document. Principles on the left, strategies through the middle, tactics on the right. Almost like Russian dolls. Start big. Some coaches just need to know what our big principles are and have got all of the solutions up their sleeve. Some need to go further down through the nesting of those Russian dolls to find specific solutions. It's built if they need it. It's not a mandate that you have to follow it, and you fail as a coach if someone comes and watches your session and you're not including the line-breaking pass in your session. The aspiration is, like I said, is that those two pieces fit together. Consider the build-up versus 2-3-4. Consider the final third and the midfield play-through concepts, and then consider some of the individual tactics. If you want to be able to skip past the press, the goalkeeper needs to be supported to be able to play line-breaking passes that skip past the press. You see Columbus here pressing with 4. You need advanced players that can handle the ball when it's travelled 50, 60, 70 yards. And to be relatively balanced in terms of your progress. Here's your wide triangle. It's not creating triangle for the sake of it. It's creating triangle to draw a fourth body over, knowing that when you expose people to this side of the pitch, there's probably a space in a different part of the pitch, and then providing depth and height to switch through, and Coco on the far side to connect to the other side, such you haven't got a 70-yard pass, which is more likely to get intercepted. But then in the final third, you need advanced players that can deliver balls. This is called a back foot cross, so like a left foot cross from the right that spins in towards the goal, and players that threaten the final line. Because if you don't get a threat on the final line, it's difficult to stretch the defence back such that you can receive it in between or actually receive it to behind to go and score goals. I'll play it one more time, and I won't talk this time. So that's intended to be a big portion of the kind of how we play piece. This is how we've sought to measure how we play. You'll see arbitrary X and Y axis. On the X axis, the one on the left is the possession percentage. On the Y axis, the one along the bottom is PPDA, so that's defensive pressure, passes per defensive action. The lower your passes per defensive action, intentionally the more intense your press is, because you allow the opposition fewer amounts of passes before you try to win the ball back. So the general view, the general kind of quadrant, if there is such a thing in football that you're aiming for, high possession and high pressure. So we seek to have more of the ball than the opposition. We seek to win it back as early as possible. So they're principles. I refer back to my Fulham experience. You'll see 3 different Fulham badges up there. One which reflects the under-18s, one which reflects the under-23s, and one which reflects the first team from the 2021 to the 2022 season, my last full season at the club. And if you were to watch those teams play, you would see the first team, the under-23s and the under-18s, play with different systems and adopt some different tactics. However, the general view is we want to be in that top quadrant. We want to try and have more of the ball than the opposition, and we want to try and win it back as early as possible. You'll see the population is relatively dense. Those 3 Fulham shields are pretty close together. But also in brackets, the under-18s came 6th that season in the under-18s Premier League. The under-23s came 1st in their league that season, and the first team came 1st in their league that season. So we can still develop the way that we play to support the players' development and win games at the same time. And in that time, we were driving down the average age of the under-23s from being 22.2 to being 20.3. So the general view had been, we need to be an older team to win the league, to get out of the second division and into the Premier League One. But it became counterintuitive, because the more we went older, the more stale the team became, the more frustrated the players became because they couldn't see progress. We arbitrarily went younger, played more under 18s, played more younger players that were perhaps further away from the first team, and ended up with a hungrier, more passionate team that were able to win more games, and almost broke the idea that you need to be older to succeed, that youth actually comes with a whole load of opportunity. That's where Houston Dynamo were in 2022, and then where we were after the first 10 games of this season. That's where we got to for the last 10 games. Now, the general view can be, so what? You have more of the ball and you press to get the ball back from the opposition. Who cares? It's a game of winning, 100%. But in the 2022 season, our average points per game was 1.06 points per game. So every game we played, we got an average 1 point. First 10 games of this season, our average points per game, 1.4. Last 10 games, average points per game, 1.9. Got into the playoffs, won the cup, qualified for the Champions League. Now, naturally, that's all because of the style of play that we played. But even though some people may go, no, it isn't, the general idea is if we've got some ideas about what we want to do, and we can align it to the fact that we won doing this, whilst you're making a causation or a correlation that probably isn't 100% true, it actually just acts as a feed to continue to feed what it is that you might do in the future. And a recognition that that's where the second team have been over the last 2 seasons, who've had a more stable coach and a more stable roster, which has meant they've been able to do something perhaps away from the bright lights a little bit more to support some success. There's the set piece, minus 11 goal differential from 2022, plus 3 from 2023. So 14 goal change, which significant difference from being 13th to being 4th. Player development needs to also be central to that. The risk is that our environment can focus only upon the way that we play. And in terms of measuring player development, perhaps one of the greatest drugs in player development is opportunity. And when opportunity is enabled, there's a really good opportunity to support players to grow. It's difficult to get better at playing football if you don't play very much football. And from a Fulham time, here's 2 examples of one we got wrong and one we got better. That's Luca de la Torre, who many of you will know from an American market, made his first team debut at Fulham at 16 years of age. Much of the data from Europe suggests that, I think it's up there, 83% of players that play in the Champions League quarterfinals across the last 10 years played first team football at 17. So that suggests, relatively speaking, those that go on to achieve were exposed relatively young. That's not to say they were playing 50, 60, 70 games a season when they were 17, but early exposure probably leads to the opportunity to grow and become a better player as a consequence. So Luca played in the first team in the EFL Cup, like the US Open Cup, at 16, but then the risk was he became a training ground player, and across the next 3 seasons played a total of 10 games. So across 3 seasons played 10 games. In the end, went out to a club in the Eredivisie called Heracles for not very much money and sought to rebuild his career such that he then went to Celta Vigo for 2 million, and he's playing regularly in the Liga now, recently been called back fairly regularly into the national team. That was a failure on our part, because the sense can be you get a player into the first team, job done. He trains every single day, he eats a nice sea bass in the canteen, he has a nice life, but he doesn't have a fantastic career. And at times the players can feel like, I'm in a first team environment, I'm training some of the best players in the country, but I'm not playing regular football, and they need minutes. Otherwise, their value depletes as a consequence. So 10 games in 3 seasons, not enough. And we don't realise our investment. The academy costs X amount of £1 million every single year. We don't realise our investment. Second example, Fabio Carvalho, who's currently at Liverpool on loan at Hull, who, from what we learnt from Luca, we did hopefully a slightly better job, which is played him more of the time. We started to work to an arbitrary target of 2,000 minutes per season. But also know that alongside the opportunity, just putting people on the pitch isn't necessarily going to be the only thing that helps them to be successful. We need to have a focused development plan. And anybody that's watched Liverpool, anybody that watched Fabio, will hopefully recognise that he's terrific on the ball. He can dribble, he can beat loads of people, but had a tendency to not turn a lot of that brilliant stuff into goal products, assists or goals. So the metric that we worked from is number of goals per minute played. And in the 2018-19 season, when he mostly played for the under-18s, he scored 1 goal every 273 minutes. So every 3 games, he scored 1 goal. The next season, when he was balanced between the 18s and the 23s, 228 minutes per goal, so getting better. The next season, which was his breakthrough season when he made his first team debut, he was down to scoring 1 goal every 133 minutes. As an advanced midfielder, 1 goal every 1.5 games. And then when he made his debut and played in the Championship the next season, in the year that Fulham got promoted, he pretty much went back to where he started, 274 minutes per goal. But the great thing is, now that he's broken into first team, is those 3 previous years where we've learned how to take him from 280 minutes to get a goal to 130 minutes to get a goal. All of that learning exists, most importantly with Fabio. He knows what it is that he needs to do to help him to achieve those things, but also with the staff who can support him to continue to go back to that level, at which point he was sold to Liverpool for around $10 million, add-ons, etc., etc. Important to recognise that a coherent plan was pretty important, but also the recognition that the closer the player got to the first team, the harder it is to manage their programme, because first team just want bodies for training. And then you can risk falling back into the Luca Della Torre example. How do you keep his programme such that he's playing enough for the 23s whilst training with the first team to get enough exposure and opportunity that helps him get better, stay in first team staff's eyes, but still get enough exposure such that he can go on and succeed. And whilst I wouldn't say we got it perfect, it was a much better example. And the second thing to highlight for all of us is that there are probably different routes to what might be perceived to be the same destination. I was fortunate a number of years ago to spend some time working with some of the England national teams and with a group of under-15s that had Jude Bellingham in it, Jamal Musiala in it, Noni Madueke in it, Tino Livramento in it, Fabio in it, Cole Palmer in it, with the general view that there's often been a sense that those players that are in a national team set up at 13 and 14 don't go on and play in the national team when they're seniors. And that was a nice example of a group that kind of grew together and all gone on and had a lot of success. And you could say that Jude and Jamal ended up in the same place. They ended up both playing in the Bundesliga, Jamal for Bayern Munich, Jude for Borussia Dortmund, obviously recently moved to Real Madrid. And that because they are both exposed to England at 13 years of age, their path was the same. They started playing for England at 13. They ended up playing in the Bundesliga and starting all of the games in the 2022 World Cup. But their journeys couldn't have been more different. Jamal grew up playing for Chelsea in an academy where there's a density of very, very good players, where it's harder to make quick progress. Jude grew up playing at Birmingham, where he was playing regularly the under-18s as a 14-year-old. He was playing regularly the under-23s as a 15-year-old and playing in the first team as a 16-year-old at Birmingham. So typically on the stretch all of the time and succeeding. Physically, even though he wasn't necessarily an early developer, he was always fairly well put together. Well, Jamal went through that kind of adolescent awkwardness where his legs are up to here and you're waiting for everything else to catch up, which made it really hard for him. As a consequence, he played virtually 0 under-18s football at Chelsea, transferred to Bayern Munich, and when he went to Bayern Munich, played in the under-17s Bundesliga for the first season. And then miraculously, as his body sorted itself out, the next season he transitioned to being a Bundesliga regular and playing in the Champions League. Jamal started all of the games for Germany at the 2022 World Cup, Jude for England at the 2022 World Cup. So again, same destination, completely different journeys, and a recognition that even though both of them fulfilled that data point that I referenced at the beginning, first team football at 17, their journey to that destination was wildly different, partly because of the clubs they were at, partly because of the type of player that they were, and the skill of the coaches and the environment is to recognise that what works for Jude doesn't work necessarily for Jamal. So each player is a case in their own. And whilst we may have some broad ideas about the importance of opportunity, the detail as to the way that that plays out is somewhat different. Just to contextualise it a little bit with some video, you'll see 10 goals from Fabio, ranging from scoring in an under-23s against Leeds to scoring for Liverpool and for Portugal. And a recognition that I think from the 10 goals, I think 7 of them are one-touch finishes, 2 of them are 2-touch finishes, and 1 of them is, I think, a 7 or an 8-touch finish, which a little while back I said he was really good at dribbling and that was his super skill. But 90% of his goals haven't come from his super skill. The other things to highlight is that for those that have seen him play, he's not a flat track bully. He's not a go from 0 to 60 in 1 second. But a lot of his goals come from around the top of the box. And what we really wanted him to be able to do is to develop the power to be able to accelerate quickly, to arrive a little bit quicker than the defender might do. And even if it's just half a second or a split second, getting there first will be the difference between scoring. He was never going to run away from people over 50 yards, but he could accelerate past or beyond people over 5 or 10. And also a recognition of where he starts his positioning from. So there's a lot of moments where he starts in between and how he times his run. And you'll see moments where he times his run outside of the eye line of the person that's ultimately responsible for him, which were the 3 big parts of his programme. Want him to score more goals? You can just say, well, score more goals and here's you kicking it in the back of the net. Connecting with the sports science stroke performance programme, connecting with like his general player movement as well as his ball connections to ensure that as many of those things were nested together as possible. I'll let you watch the video. The context hopefully speaks for itself. Can you do it at Stoke on a cold Tuesday night? So we spoke about measuring the game model. This is some of the ways that we might think about measuring player development. Some of it was data focused, some of it is eyeballing particular things that are going on and checking how he's getting on. I guess the big question then becomes, well, how do you coach that? What do coaching sessions look like that enable you to build the game model alongside the individual needs of the players? And the aspiration is that the syllabus is less about covering the ground. I've got to get through this session. We spent 70% of our sessions working on plan out from the back. So it's less of a mandated, this is what you must do, and more of a dot-to-dot, joining up what the players need and making it responsive. So coaches don't necessarily know what they're going to do in 10 weeks' time because they haven't lived the previous 9 weeks yet. And what we do in those 9 weeks will shape what happens in week 10 as a consequence of learning, which perhaps changes the idea of score, which I guess a lot of football and curriculums have been built off of the basis of, which is you turn up at 9 o'clock and you go to a science lesson. And when the bell rings, you move from a science lesson into a maths lesson. And what you learn in maths or science or history is perhaps built over a 6-week topic attached to a theme like the First World War. So you learn stuff that you can repeat in a test to achieve an exam which helps you move to the next level. which probably isn't football. However, a lot of these things die hard, so it's probably finding alternative ways to do principally the same thing. These are our principles from the Dynamo: activation practices, smaller numbered practices, larger numbered practices, with the 4 pitch types around the outside: wide pitch, narrow pitch, big pitch, small pitch. And know that if you do a heavy bias of small numbered practices in tight areas, your players will probably get really good at holding on and managing the ball. Fantastic. But if you never expose it to the big pitch, they probably don't develop the legs, the understanding of the tactics to be able to do it on a bigger pitch. The reverse is probably also true. Loads of stuff in a big 11v11 pitch with big numbers, good tactical understand the concepts, can't manage the ball. And the activation piece is intended there to be a connection between sports science doing a warm-up and sports science and coaches organising a football practice that embeds both the physical outcomes that sports performance believe are important with our game outcomes. And if we can waste no minutes, not even 15 at the beginning of a session, from supporting the players to understand how the team plays and what their needs are, we're going to optimise and maximise every single minute. If we do stuff on a wide pitch, we know we'll probably get more lateral movement side to side before we go forward than if we play on a narrow pitch, but we'll probably get more vertical up and down play as a consequence of the demands of the design of the practice. Similarly, big pitch will give you bigger tactical concepts. Smaller pitch will probably give you tighter area stuff. The choice is for the coach, but be willing enough to reflect on your own practice and recognise where your bias is. Because if your bias is of too much of one thing, the risk is the diet that you expose your players to becomes the player that they become. So be aware of your bias. You don't have got to change for everybody, but just recognise the things that play out in practice. And this is probably a similar practice that I'll seek to do with Peter's group this afternoon, which reflects smaller numbers, but also intends to place a focus on some of the team and individual elements that I've spoken throughout the presentation. This is perhaps an oversimplification, but my personal beliefs are for practices to have 2 teams, 2 goals and 1 ball. Because if you want to get better at playing football, it's probably good to practice playing football. And the risk is at times is people learn the practice and get good at the practice rather than learn the game of football. However, that doesn't mean that we can't do stuff. It's not just throw the ball in and off you go, let the game teach people what they're doing. There's a whole range of different things that we might do to enable some things to happen more than others. This has got a restriction in it. I'd like to say this was intentional, but Peter said that he's been working with his team recently on build-up play, trying to get +1 in the defensive line, provoking the opposition to play past them. The intention in this practice is that you can't play the first pass into the middle third, the area that's shadowed or blocked out in this particular slide, which means find other ways. Because it's effectively a 2 versus 2, if you include the goalkeeper, a 3 versus 2 in that first part of the pitch, you're probably going to need to provoke them on and use the goalkeeper to help you get out, and know that once you've played the first pass in that low third, the condition is spent, you can play into the midfield area, which has hopefully been opened up by drawing the opposition onto you. But also in using restrictions, the idea is that you don't remove or limit the players to only one choice. You take some things away, but you leave them with more than one choice, which means if you can't play into the middle third, you can play straight into the advanced third, which gives the opportunity, if you go back to the Houston Dynamo clip, for your goalkeeper to play that line breaker onto the final line to support you to miss out the press when people come onto you. So it's a game, it's got 2 goals, 2 teams and 1 ball, but there's some stuff going on there which both allows the individual players and the team to focus on some stuff. And here's a video that follows a similar mode. This is the under-18 team that you saw at the beginning, practicing some of those things, which is where we'll finish the presentation once this is done. You'll see what's effectively a central circle through the middle of the pitch. So mats that are laid out that organise a central circle, and you've got a 5 versus 5. 1 goalkeeper, 4 pinks at one end, 1 goalkeeper and 4 blues at the other end. The conditions are twofold. Build from outside the circle, score from inside the circle. So similar to the animated example that you just saw, start the attack low, draw the opposition on, get it into the central circle from where you can score. Which says, draw the opposition onto you, trust the goalkeeper to play in relatively tight spaces where they're close to people and make quick decisions, and draw the opposition on such that you can access the central circle to be able to score. You'll effectively start to see a build-up versus 2. Position people in low areas outside of the circle to draw them on, to then get into the circle to finish. And that aspect about the practice, involving a whole range of different concepts. You've got build-up, you've got pressure, and you've got convert all going on in the same session. All of those elements going on at the same time with a different focus for different players at different moments in the practice. So people could say, is it a build-up session? Yeah. Is it a defending session? Yep. Is it a goal-scoring session? Yeah, it's all of those things simultaneously at the same time. Goalkeeper coaches in the room may be looking like going, yeah, goalkeepers have got a tough time. Yeah, they have. They have. But there's a big focus on their build-up in this, which you can draw the attention to how they organise the build-up, as well as trying to succeed when perhaps their backs are to the wall a little bit. But the second and final part is a recognition that the individual players and their development needs are nested inside of this as well. So you'll see that first player highlighted, Jalen, who's a forward, an attacking player. And in a moment, you'll see a second player highlighted, Aaron, who plays in the same position, but they're focusing on different stuff. Jalen's working on letting the ball run across his body to finish, so more kind of lateral movements. The ball comes across, let it roll across your body, finish on your left foot or the other way with your right. Aaron's working more on hold-up play, back to goal. Ball comes into my body, hold it up, roll people, set off, roll out of pressure, to be able to score. So big practice, or 5v5 practice, but a bigger practice with a focus on individual players while still nesting the overall team objectives into the session. 10 players, 3 coaches, because if you're a coach on your own with 10 players, it may be that you can't focus individual attention on every single player. You pick 2 or 3 at a moment in time. If there's 3 of you working, you can say you focus on those 3, you focus on those 3, you focus on those 4. And ensure that their individual needs are attended to in the practice. And a recognition, like at the outset where we said things are focused upon the players, Aaron's need as a centre forward in terms of the things that are going to help him score a number of goals in the Premier League are very, very different from Jalen's. If we ask them to do exactly the same thing, we risk Jalen trying to become Aaron or Aaron trying to become Jalen and don't necessarily enable them to develop in a way that suits their individual needs. And that's the general idea. Tell people what you're going to tell them it, tell them what you told them. What's important in your environment? How do you play football? What are the needs of the players? How do you then go about ensuring you intentionally and aspirationally coach both your game model or your intentions around the way that you want the team to play with the individual needs of the players, and track and measure how the team gets on, how the individuals get on, and ourselves, what it is and how it is that we coach to enable those things to become more relevant. Thank you for listening. Like I said, I'll give my email address at the end. If people want any of the slides or the video, please drop us a line. I'm happy to share it, but would respectfully ask that it doesn't get sent. If you want to share it within your club, great, but please respectfully don't send it onto social media or anywhere else, because you'll get me in more trouble than I'm in most days of the week anyway. Thank you for turning out and listening. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to dive in.
We do want to have questions on microphone because we are recording the session. So just pop your hand up. I'll run over to you. You got a question?
Hi. So at a youth level, I have a question as to developing these concepts and sort of progressing it. How much do you recommend we balance it on the field, we're just talking about it, versus like a classroom setting or whiteboard action to sort of get them invested in before there's 11, 12-year-olds that are all scatterbrained and hold still, stand there, watch him.
Yeah.
You know, how do you convey that to young people?
Particularly with players of that age, there's a part of this which is what we're preparing them for, as well as the impact of what we do now. It depends on your environment. My general view would be most sessions there is at least a couple of minutes in the classroom before the session. Now, that will depend if your classroom's a mile away from the football pitch, good luck. But as a general view, at least some way in which we conceptualise some video of them playing before, some elite video, maybe a session plan, maybe a focus on a particular player, such that we make some direct intentional connection to what's going to come next as a consequence of what went before. If that becomes 10 minutes at the beginning of every session, that's 10 minutes they're not playing football. However, if we never do it, and if we do it for 1 or 2 minutes, we can actually buy ourselves a whole load of credit on the football pitch as a consequence of what we've placed in their mind before they go out and practice. We have coaches that have kids that rock up 5 minutes into the sessions for a collection of different reasons. Houston, like Boston, is a big city and kids travel from loads of different places after a day at school. They use WhatsApp. Here's this video, watch this video before it happens, before the session happens. So, and the same can happen after the session. Here's some clips of what went on. So I guess the broad answer is as much as possible. But forgive yourself the fact that just because we've shown them something on video doesn't mean they've understood it. It doesn't mean that they even care or that it makes a difference. And we had this conversation in our coaches meeting this week. We've got an under 17 who's perceived to be quite exciting. And people have said he's still had the same problem he's had over the last 3 years. Everybody's identified it, everybody's coached it, and we haven't seen any difference yet. And he kind of said, yeah, but he's a 14-year-old playing in an under 17s team. He's physically big and like physically mature, which at times we can mistake his 14-year-old nature to being bigger and older because he looks bigger and older. And it may be that his cognitive and his emotional maturity catches up in a year's time or 2 years' time, which might mean even though you might not see the direct impact of the work that you're doing now, don't misunderstand that at some point in time, the pieces just drop into the slots. What's invariably happened in my life is the coach that's coaching him in that year takes all the credit. It was me. But that's why it's important to have a coherent, intentional program that says what you're doing now should connect with what they do with the next coach next season, the season after. And they'll do it differently from you, and they should do, because we're different human beings who approach stuff in different ways. But if we principally hold it together with the same stuff, it means that stuff that we teach or we hope that they learn today might not land until 10 years down the line. Or in my experience, sometimes it never lands. You never get through. And forgive yourself that as well, because as much as we should never give up on people, we should probably let ourselves off the hook to say, you can't make everybody Pele, unfortunately. Great question, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks, guys.
Everybody for coming.
Lunch, thank you. Oh, sorry, if those want an email address, sorry, I did say, but if you're still going out the door because it's not of interest to you, that's absolutely fine. It's B Bartlett, so double B, BBARTLETT at HoustonDynamo.com. So B Bartlett at HoustonDynamo.com. If there's anything specific that you want, such that I don't send you a load of nonsense that you don't want, just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Marcus. Thank you.
Appreciate it.